Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to Naijha Speaks. I'm Naijha Wright-Brown, contributing for Jane Unchained News, co-owner of the Land of Kush Vegan Soul Bistro in Baltimore, and executive director of the Black Vegetarian Society. Today, we are connecting the dots on intersectional veganism. We have some amazing guests lined up. Joining me is my co-host, Nivi Jaswal, founder of the Versa Foundation and JIVINITI Coalition. Let's get right down to it. Tell us more about connecting the dots, Nivi.
Thank you so much, Naijha. I'm so excited to be here and welcome our panelists, ALICIA ROBB, MALLORY COMBEMALE, and the beautiful LAILA KASSAM. And so let me start actually with talking about the JIVINITI Coalition. As many of you know, the JIVINITI Coalition is a women-led coalition, and we focus on primarily women of color, both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. We've been campaigning and we've been urging the Biden-Harris administration to consider going plant forward and plant-based and go beyond animals and forge forward ahead towards a cruelty-free economy. We've also launched a petition, which is #PlantPoweredKamala, and we're requesting the Vice President Kamala Harris to try veganism, for good measure. So, and with respect to that, we've been doing lots and lots of critical conversations, and we've held panel discussions, news conferences, and so on. And Connecting the Dots is a series that is going to focus on amazing, accomplished women leaders in diverse fields, and we will connect the dots and talk about intersectionality. We'll talk about racism, trauma, impact investing, inheritance, identity, food systems, and so on. I'd now like to bring on the screen with us LAILA KASSAM. LAILA, you are the co-founder of Animal Think Tank. You're joining us from the UK, and you have co-authored with your father, Dr. Amir Kassam, a beautiful, amazing, must-have, highly recommended book. I can't have enough of it. Here's the book, Rethinking Food and Agriculture. Tell us more about your work, and then we'll get started.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Nivi and Naijha. So my professional background is in international development, where I've worked since 2003 doing research into issues around poverty and food security in the global south. I have a PhD in economics, and I've been vegan since 2013. A few years ago, I left international development because I realized it doesn't align with my vegan and other values. And I went on a deep dive and started connecting the dots between animal and human oppression and our destruction of the natural world. And all of those experiences led me to co-editing Rethinking Food and Agriculture, and also led to me co-founding Animal Think Tank, which is a grassroots organization building a mass movement for animal freedom in the UK.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. LAILA, my first question is for you. Vegans and some, even non-vegans, flexitarians, people who are plant curious, all of us, and enough has been said about it in the mainstream media as well, that animal agriculture, livestock, it's long shadow, it's the only problem. But when I started reading your book, one of the things I realized is I did not know how destructive conventional crop farming really is. Tell us more about that.
Right, you're absolutely right. So the conventional industrial crop farming model is the dominant model globally in the global north and in the south. And in essence, it's based on a mindset and worldview of being at war with nature to dominate her for our benefit. And there's so many things wrong with it, but I'm just going to focus on 3 issues that I think are really important: tillage, chemicals, and lack of diversity. So conventional farming, and even much organic and so-called sustainable farming, is based on tillage, which destroys the soil, including soil life, like earthworms. And this leads to massive erosion and degradation and releases carbon into the atmosphere. And then we have agrochemicals. Conventional agriculture is dependent on agrochemicals, many of which were originally repurposed chemical weapons from World War II. So we are quite literally at war with nature. And obviously, agrochemicals have a terrible impact on humans, non-humans, the planet. And then there's the lack of diversity in the conventional model, which focuses just on a few types of staple crops like wheat and maize, and also uses these modern varieties that focus on yield, which also means that it sacrifices other things like nutritional content and resilience. crops are also grown in monocultures, making them highly vulnerable to disease. So this lack of diversity has wide-ranging impact on food security, on the nutritional content of our plant-based food, on biodiversity and ecosystem health. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this model is driven by the corporate food regime and by profit. And development organizations like the Gates Foundation are also pushing this model in the global south, which seriously affects marginalized groups like smallholder farmers in the global south. So a plant-based food system based on this model doesn't go far enough, in my opinion.
Wow.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Wow. Serious business. Wow.
Yeah, so Alicia, we're actually going to go over to you, and you've just heard LAILA talk about how the conventional crop system, the farming system, just does not go far enough. And you're an impact investor, the founder of Next Wave Impact, and tell us about what's the scenario when it comes to investments and financial markets and so on. How are you ensuring that the financial markets and the financial system as it's set up does go far enough, or where do you think it does not go far enough? Tell us about impact investing. What's the definition of it?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it certainly doesn't go far enough. But one thing I was thinking of when LAILA presented was, she didn't even get to the whole additional issue of most of the crops are being fed to animals. We produce animals for food, and the whole antibiotics use that comes with that as well. And so it's all multi-layered, and it's such a problem. Around impact investing, again, we're looking at investing for social and environmental impact, and impact investing can mean different things to different people. Anytime you spend money, you are impact investing. So your consumer dollars is a form of impact investing. Do you support Amazon? Do you support your local store? I work in venture capital and impact investing. So I manage a fund that invests in women and people of color that are scaling impact companies. So we want to see companies that are solving real world challenges that are scalable and that could be very impactful. So we're looking at not just financial return, but also a social return on our investments. Philanthropy is another way to do impact investing, whether it's through giving and donating, which has obviously a negative 100% financial return, but you're doing it for the social or environmental impact that donation has. Impact investing is looking for, it's a whole spectrum of what kinds of returns investors are looking for. Some impact first are looking for just a recoup of capital or partial recouping of capital, all the way through people looking for market returns. But when we think about market returns and how unsustainable that is, I think we really need to rethink what kind of financial returns are sustainable for our planet and are building a world that works for everyone.
Yeah, very well said. And thank you so much for explaining that. It's absolutely important that the kind of world we're actually building and the future systems that we want to create, the foundation of those is more equitable and it's sustainable. And both of those things, if they're, if even one of those is missing, then we're actually thinking about it in the wrong way. I'm going to go over to Mallory. And Mallory, you are the co-founder of Inheritance Project. Very high regard and respect for the work that you do and your organization does. In fact, Mallory's leading a session for the JIVINITI Coalition on February 12th for all our coalition leaders. And we're going to actually be dealing with concepts of identity and inheritance. And, because when we think about impact investing or we think about agriculture or food systems and so on, human beings make these systems. We're the ones who are laying the foundation of all of these systems. And if we're held back, or if we feel we're held back, given certain identity stories that we may have, how do we actually untangle that web so that we all bring our best feet forward? Mary, tell us about Inheritance Project and your work there.
Thank you so much, Nivi. That was such a beautiful explanation of why I care so much about this work. And first, I want to start by sharing what we define as inheritance. We don't just mean the physical objects or money or physical property that you might receive as inheritance in a will. When we say inheritance at Inheritance Project, we mean everything that we've inherited from past generations that make us who we are. And that includes genetics. It includes our culture, our values, our stories, our beliefs, and a lot of things that are often invisible or hard to see from just looking at a person. So for example, a bit about my inheritance and food. My mom's family is Chinese Singaporean, and they left China in the early 1900s during the Civil War and came to Singapore and lived there during World War II and the Japanese occupation. And even though I grew up in London in a middle-class home, I was raised with my mom telling me so many stories of our family and malnutrition and food insecurity, and how during the Japanese occupation, they only had cockroaches to eat. And so a big belief that I was raised with was finish everything on your plate because you're so lucky to have food. And so all of these beliefs and values and stories that are sometimes quite individual, sometimes belong to broader cultures, really impact how we make choices and create the systems that we're a part of. And often we don't even realize that these stories and beliefs are running in the background of our consciousness. A lot of the times they influence our behavior unconsciously. So what we do at Inheritance Project is we have training and coaching programs that help individuals and teams understand what our inheritance is, what are all of those factors that make up who we are, and what do we actually want to keep into the legacy that we leave for the future. And so we've inherited all these systems that I think all of us here can see and acknowledge are broken in many ways, whether it's the mainstream financial system, the farming system, agriculture, the way food is produced. And we're born into this world and inherited all of these systems that are built on stories and built on beliefs. And so in order to move into a different kind of future, we first have to really understand and acknowledge all that we've inherited, uncover those unconscious belief systems that are running underneath all of these systems, and then go through a process of inner change first, where we start to let go of those stories and those beliefs and start to tell a new story for ourselves, for our own lives, that can then ripple out and be a new story in our communities, in our organizations, and in our society.
Mallory, let me ask you a question. How is inheritance connected to food systems?
Sure. As I was just sharing, I think, firstly, inheritance is connected to everything. Everything that exists in the world, some aspect of it was inherited. It was here before we arrived, and we're, by being here, carrying it forward. And the same is true for our food choices and our food systems. And just like Nivi was saying, the food system and any system is actually made up of individuals. And so I really do believe that in order to have systemic change, we need to have individual change, and individual change in terms of the choices that we each make in our lives to create that ripple of systemic change. But often changing our individual choices can be really challenging because of our inheritance, because of the inherited beliefs we have, and because of the inherited context that we're born into. So we each have different challenges. We each have different traumas. We each have different belief systems that we were handed down by society or our upbringing. And often those can really stand in the way of us making a conscious choice or a conscious change. But the good news is that all of those challenges and barriers can actually be opportunities for growth, opportunities for transcendence. And so my thesis is, in order to change our bigger food systems, we need to first examine what's driving our own individual food choices. And that, so much of that is our inheritance, our culture, our genetics, the context we were raised in, and the stories and values that we consciously, unconsciously have.
Right, exactly. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Now, you had a question, Nivi, because I was going to ask LAILA.
Go for it, Naijha.
Okay, the inclusive responsibility. Can you define that? What does that word really mean, and what does it have to do with veganism?
Right, thank you, Naijha. Well, when Mallory was talking, I was feeling a lot of resonance, because inclusive responsibility is a framework which is actually an ethical framework. It's trying to intentionally think about the values and ethics that underpin a food system that is truly sustainable and just for all. And it's based on values such as inclusion, justice, equity, and care. So this is a concept that we define in the book. And it's basically, we thought that our multiple connected crises that we're facing globally ultimately reflects an underlying crisis of ethics and values. For example, when we think of our economic system, which is a huge driver of these crises, it's based on things like competition and exploitation and extraction. So any alternative systems we create have to be underpinned by alternative ethical frameworks that support life rather than destroy it. So we suggest an inclusively responsible food and agriculture paradigm would be ecologically sustainable. It would be relevant for smallholders. It would meet the increasing need globally for whole food plant-based diets. It would integrate into social movements that are resisting the corporate food regime. And it would respect and protect the rights of all sentient beings, humans and non-humans, and of nature. And so the conventional agriculture system, I hope you realize from my previous answer, doesn't do any of these things. And in the book, we propose an alternative paradigm that we think does all of these things, which I won't go into right now. But I think the main point I want to sort of convey is that as vegans working towards a plant-based food system, if it's still based on the conventional model with the same ethics and values that underpin that, and if it's still within the same paradigm of the corporate food regime, we need to understand that that's still going to be causing unnecessary suffering to free living animals, to marginalized humans, and to the planet. So inclusive responsibility offers a vision or a framework for an alternative life-giving system.
Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic. Yeah, and LAILA, when you talk about inclusive responsibility, you've built a website around that. So it's inclusiveresponsibility.earth. And if you guys want to get the book, we're promoting LAILA's book. Please go get this book. And in case you want to, read excerpts from different experts and understand what's inside the book, inclusiveresponsibility.earth has excerpts from the book, and you can get to know more about that. I'm going to go over to Alicia. And Alicia, you have an interest in investing. You understand, the financial markets and the finance system really, really well. And you have different passions. You have a passion for, gender and racial equity, for veganism. How do you combine both of those in your work?
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of an accidental venture capitalist. I had done a pilot fund when I was still at the Kauffman Foundation, trying to get more women and people of color into early stage investing by doing a learning by doing fund to train new investors. And it was focused on women. So we had 99 women in this fund. And what I realized in this pilot was that I really wanted to focus on companies that were having an impact and solving the societal challenges. And that's why I kind of pivoted and focused on not just investing in women and people of color, but also investing in impact companies that were led by women and people of color, and trying to mobilize women and people of color to become early stage investors, because the gender and racial gaps in entrepreneurship, in investing, the lack of diversity and inclusion in those systems is perpetuating one reason why we see most of the venture capital going to male-led firms is most of the venture capitalists are male. And the systems, we talk about systems and structures, the venture capital model may not be the right fit for women and people of color, or folks that want to scale their businesses but retain ownership. And so, right now I'm on the board of the Kachua Impact Fund, which is focusing on alternative structures and new models to get capital to entrepreneurs in a way that work for them. Because my fund didn't have a thesis of investing in a vegan economy, it's a diversified fund. I actually ended up starting an angel group syndicate called Vegan Investors, and we're at veganinvestors.com. And we're looking at investing in vegan-led vegan companies and helping them scale. One thing that LAILA just mentioned about, if we're just perpetuating the same systems that currently exist, we're not going to really move the needle. And so when we think about some of the acquisitions that have happened in the vegan space by multinationals like Tyson, it does help get a wider distribution of the goods for consumers, but at what cost? I think when we think about how we want to see the accumulation of the benefits of the vegan economy accruing to people just taking advantage of the vegan, the vegan economy is on fire right now with the IPO of Beyond Meat and so forth. I think there's a lot of money flowing in. And not always for the right reasons, or not, I shouldn't say the right reasons, but the values aligned folks. So we're really focused on building a community of like-minded people that are in it to promote and advocate for and build a sustainable economy that is just and fair and works for everyone.
Yeah, that's excellent about, values alignment, because if our values are not aligned, then veganism or no veganism, the impact of it and accumulation of all the benefits and the wealth accrued from it is going to probably stay the same, and we'll end up with the same top-heavy pyramid, that we end up, that we see at this point. So Naijha.
Yes, yeah. I was gonna say something about the investing and the racial equity in that, because I talk to folks all the time. I've been investing since I was in my early 20s, and you got to save before you can invest. And a lot of times, an issue in our community is we're not saving enough to invest. You don't want to lose money. Investing can be risky, so you don't want to lose money that you don't have. So that's definitely something that we need to work on. But to Mallory, what needs to change for society to transition to a plant-based, more sustainable economy and food system? There needs to be some changes. So what needs to change?
There needs to be some changes. First, I want to say I'm so inspired by both of your work. As a female startup founder, it is a challenge to get access to resources that feel values aligned with the company an ethos that we're trying to build. So I really appreciate your work, Alicia and LAILA. I was so inspired by your vision for the future. And so much of the work that we do is helping individuals and teams actually make that transformation from the present that we've inherited to that beautiful vision of a more equitable, sustainable, inclusive future. And for some people, the gap just feels so large. And there are a lot of reasons why it's hard to cross that gulf between what we inherited and where we want to go. And a lot of it is because our inheritance actually lives in our bodies. Mm-hmm. So our stories, our values, they're not just mental. Actually, they're ingrained in our genetics, in our nervous system, in the pathways in our brain. And so while we may want to make changes, it can be really, really challenging when we're dealing with these ingrained patterns of behavior in our bodies. And so often this creates a lot of fear of change. And I think about my own family. My father is French, and my grandfather, when he found out that me and my brother became vegetarian many years ago, he was so upset and angry and saw it as a rejection of his culture.
Yes.
And so if we're not acknowledging and really holding space for all of these old values and stories to be let go of, not just mentally, but also in the body, we're going to keep coming up against this kind of resistance from people who want to cling to old paradigms because that's what they know, because that's what's comfortable, because that's a part of their inheritance that they feel connected to in some way. So in order for things to change, we as a culture, as individuals, have to become much more comfortable with change both internally and externally. And I think that is actually one of the beauties of what's happened in the last year with all the disruption and changes, as heartbreaking as a lot of it has been. It has forced a lot of people to become a lot more comfortable with change, and learn to embrace this process of change within themselves.
Yeah, that's very well said, Mallory. In fact, you're right. You know, what's not being said often when that starts to take up oxygen, we know that, you know, we need to be looking at things very differently, and which is why we're doing Connecting the Dots, because there are certain things that need courage, vulnerability. We can't be existing just in our own little silos and saying, this is my tribe, I'm going to keep hugging them and not talk to anybody else. But we want to bring people from different tribes. You know, you guys are tribal chiefs. And we're getting you here. This is our bonfire, and we want to, you know, not dance around the edges, but we want to play in the playground and have these conversations with courage. And when you talk about letting it go and letting that the burden of some of these stories of inheritance and identity, letting them go not just at a rational cognitive level, but also letting them go at a bodily, at a visceral level, such that we can trigger bigger social movements, for example. And so my next question is to LAILA.
I have to talk with Alicia right now, so we can just ask that question because she has to go.
Yeah.
So Alicia, if you tell us, you have an upcoming Founders of Color showcase in May, and that sounds amazing. Why are you doing that? Please tell us some more.
Yeah, so, you know, less than 3% of venture capital goes to women, female CEOs, but the amount of venture capital going to people of color is even lower. And so one of the problems with financing your business is communities of color have lower wealth levels. So they don't have that friends and family money or their own money to really jumpstart their businesses. So they're even more reliant on outside capital, and they don't necessarily have the networks with those with deep pockets. And so they're constrained, and it's you know, hindering their ability to grow and scale and even start, quite honestly. So
yes,
we are showcasing founders of color that are raising capital for their companies and bringing investors to get together that share our investment thesis and investing in underrepresented entrepreneurs. So it's just www.founders.color.com, or it's on our website, nextwaveimpact.com. But we're trying to mobilize a community of investors that share this investment thesis and really showcase opportunities of founders of color that may not be in the networks of these investors, so that they can see there's great ideas coming from everywhere, not just Silicon Valley and Boston, not just from white men. Good ideas are coming from everywhere, and these companies need capital. So how can we mobilize more capital in ways that work for them?
Love it. I would definitely check that out. I've read a book by Dr. Boyce Watkins called Black American Money, and he talks exactly about that, the wealth gap. So thank you. I know you have to go, Alicia, so I appreciate your time. Take care until we talk again.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. It's a pleasure.
LAILA, sorry about that. Alicia had to go. She's launching another meeting on the hour. So my question to you is about social movements. You know, tell us about how you think about social movements and what Animal Think Tank are actually doing about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the major learnings that we've had at Animal Think Tank that I'd love to share is that if we want transformative social change, whether we're talking about food system transformation, whether we're talking about animal freedom, climate justice, gender equality, etc., we need diversified and strong movement ecologies. So when we look at past social justice movements, we find that they've included groups with different approaches to social change, working in synergy with one another. And usually there are three main approaches, and I think we're talking about all of them in this panel. So personal transformation, which is what Mallory has been talking about, building alternatives, which is what Alicia has been talking about, and changing the dominant institutions that shape society, which really means structural change, change, changing the laws, regulations, etc., from inside and outside the system. So successful social movements rely on all three of these broad approaches. And in the UK, where I am and where Animal Think Tank is based, the main focus in the animal movement is on personal transformation through vegan outreach. There's some focus on alternatives. There's a bit on changing structures through welfare reforms, but we don't really have that much focus on structural change to end animal exploitation through things like mass protest and civil disobedience. So that is what Animal Think Tank is working to fill this gap, because we believe that mass protest can catalyze the wider movement ecology and shift public opinion. So think of the success of Extinction Rebellion in the UK before COVID, think of BLM, think of all of the movements, protest movements around the world that's really shaken things up in the last few years. And so if we believe that we need a strong movement ecology, which we do, then that means that everyone is needed. There's no one right way to reach our goal. We need structural and cultural change. We need systemic and individual change. We need to resist and dismantle the current system while building the new system. And we also need to be strategic. So we need to have a bold vision for change and a roadmap to get there that we can unify behind. So that's what Animal Think Tank is all about. And if you're interested in learning more, check out the website, reach out, find me on Facebook, because we're always looking for good people to collaborate with and to join us.
Thank you for that, LAILA. Yes, definitely. We have a lot of work to do, and the protests are definitely helping. So we have to keep that up. We have a lot of changes to make. And Mallory, again, I'm going back to you. How can people start to become aware of and transform their inherited beliefs and stories about food?
To answer this question, I'd actually love to invite you to participate in an exercise with me. It will be really short.
Okay, I love exercise.
So we're going to close our eyes. Just give your body a little shake. Let's take 3 deep breaths together. Deep breath in. Sigh it out. Deep breath in. Exhale, let it go. Breathe deeply and slowly. And as you relax into your body, I'd love for you to bring to mind a defining moment, a specific experience around food that was really formative for you. It could be something that felt positive or something that felt challenging. And if there are many, many moments that are coming up, that's great. Take note of them. And let's just pick one to focus on now, whatever draws your attention. Love you to really allow yourself to go back into that moment in time and feel how it felt in your body. And maybe you even start to move your body with that feeling. You can make a shape with your body that expresses how it felt to be you in that moment. Let's just stay here for a few moments, breathe with it, feel that feeling. Then we're gonna sit up, take a deep breath in, shake it out, let it go. And I invite all of you listening, if you did that exercise, to write down, journal for just a few moments what came up for you, what that revealed about how that moment shaped you and your beliefs about food. So one small offering, and if you're interested in doing more exercises like this and learning more of our methodology of how to unpack your inheritance and transform it to leave a different legacy of the future, please stay in touch and get connected to us on Instagram or via our website.
All right.
Thank you so much, Mallory and LAILA. We're going to bring on our new panelists now for segment 2. And we've been having amazing conversations. So we're going to let Mallory and LAILA go. And we'll bring on Amira Mercer, Dr. Naik, and Susan Newhouse. And we're kickstarting our segment 2. We'll be talking, with Amira about racism, trauma, spirituality, We'll be talking to Susan Newhouse about consumers, innovation, and research, and what does it mean for the emerging ideas and trends in food systems and in food and all of the other ideas that we're surrounded with. And Dr. Naik, we're going to talk to you about lifestyle medicine, environmental racism, and how the food systems are all connected, and what are the different things that you're observing in your patients, in your practice. So those are the things that we're going to talk about. I'm going to go over to Amira. Amira, welcome to our panel. And you are very passionate about spirituality and racism. Both Naijha and I bet a lot of our viewers have read your amazing, insightful article on eater.com. So, heartiest congratulations for that. So tell us that how are racism and the food we eat connected? Because a lot of people don't put the two together.
Right. Well, I just want to say you guys caught me burning my Palo Santo.
I love it because I do that too. So I'm like so connected with all of that. Awesome.
Yeah, setting the spiritual mood. But
yeah.
I think when we talk about racism, we're talking about the global system within which we happen to operate in this modern time. And so racism is about the structure that you live, the structure of the society that you live in. And a lot of people don't realize that racism has completely distorted our relationship with food. It's distorted what we think of as food, and it's distorted our access to food, especially people who are oppressed under racism. So for this reason, a lot of Black communities, and I talk about this in my Eater article, the nature of colonization, slavery, and capitalism have resulted in Black communities not having access to real foods, which are fruits and vegetables. We tend to think of food now as something that comes from a supermarket instead of something that grows from the ground. We look at it as something that someone has to provide to us instead of something that we can just go outside and pick off of a tree or pull out of the ground. So there's a complete lack of access that racism has created for Black communities in their relationship with food. One of the things that I think you can do to connect the dots between racism and food, if that's still not clear to you, is read my Eater article, because I break it all down there. But also participate in a community garden or start a community garden, because you'll start to see how local food access is supposed to be. It'll connect the dots for you on how easily it's supposed to be to go get produce and take it to your home and provide for your family and not have to worry about food shortages, or if this is going on in the country, am I going to be able to feed my family? Our food is a God-given right for us. It was literally created in this world for us. So, yeah.
Nice. Dr. Naik, please tell us about your work.
Hi, everyone. So first, can you hear me okay? I just put in a new set of Bluetooth speakers. Okay. All right.
You sound great.
Or Bluetooth earphones, I should say. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm Dr. Priyamvada Naik, and I'm a triple board certified physician in pulmonary medicine, critical care medicine, and lifestyle medicine. And so I see these intersections, and a lot of what Amira is talking about, I see the real world effects of food apartheid. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is at every step of our food system, when we talk about the use of animals for food, we encounter racism. The people who work in these industries are predominantly poor, marginalized people, whether that's prison labor, and we know
Right.
because of systemic racism that the prisons are predominantly filled with Black and brown people, whether that's undocumented immigrants. And then you move on to the slaughterhouses where they're exposed to infectious diseases and injuries and, amputations and trauma. just from the violence of this job that they really don't have a choice in doing. And then you move to the meatpacking industries. And while COVID has exposed how dangerous the meatpacking industry is to the people who work there, it's always been the case. There's always infections and risk involved with that. Then you package the food, and that food continues to cause not only infectious diseases, but it also causes health issues like heart disease and stroke and cancer. And these are the foods that predominantly are available in many marginalized communities because of Jim Crow era red laws and things like that.
Yes.
But the thing that really is frustrating for many of us is even if we try to remove ourselves from the system, we are still exposed to the healthcare dangers, right? So when there's a recall on spinach because of E. coli or salmonella, these are occurring because of the animal agriculture industry. So even if you're vegan, you are still impacted by the animal agriculture industry.
Yeah, you work with patients with lung issues due to their participation in animal agriculture in that sector. Can you tell us about that? Do you have any statistics?
Yeah. So, and in fact, you'll get a lot more information about this in an upcoming documentary that I'm in called The End of Medicine. But when we create these factory farms, the industries preferentially put them in poor Black and brown communities, and exposure to these high concentrations of animals and then animal feces and then the grains that are fed to them results in really dangerous levels of air pollution. We know that you can test air a mile away from a factory farm and find organic dusts, inorganic dusts. You can also find bacteria, various fungi. You can find lots of infections or infectious possibilities. We know from studies that people who live and work near these areas are more likely to develop drug-resistant infections. From a lung disease standpoint, just exposure to fumes, just exposure to ammonia and hydrogen sulfide fumes from the feces and the grains and all of this stuff, I see terminal lung disease. I see people develop end-stage scarring lung disease, requiring oxygen and a lung transplant if they can afford it. And most of these people cannot afford it in our system.
Thank you for sharing that information.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Naik. Those are awful things. And I think that, a lot of people around the world, and especially in this country, people who are residing in more comfortable, more prosperous zip codes, they don't understand that there is a significant part of the population in this country that has been zip coded or zip locked into a certain destiny.
Right.
And that is going to have an impact on their health outcomes, come what may, just because they are living in one of those distressed zip codes or at-risk zip codes. These definitions that I'm actually sharing are available in the public domain. There's a lot of mapping that has happened of zip codes in the United States by an organization called the Economic Innovation Group. So, our viewers and to panelists as well, if you haven't visited that website, have a look at the work that they're doing. And so I'm going to go over to Susan for my next question. Susan, we started talking about the zip codes, and you and I, we've been working on some primary research, and you are our qualitative research lead and innovation consultant on the JIVINITI research program. I wanted to ask you that as Susan Newhouse and Associates and as a former co-worker, where we both served at one of the largest media and research organizations, you and your career is steeped in research innovation, product innovation, communications innovation, advertising creation, and so on. I want you to talk to us about your work and about your background, and also tell us about the importance of research in innovation as more and more plant-based entrepreneurs start to consider scaling up.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation. I've worked in consumer research and new product innovation for about 20 years now. And so I always say, if you go in a grocery store and you go down an aisle and you see something on the shelf, I probably worked for either that industry or one of those brands at one point or another. I think, when you look at the food and beverage industry in particular, I never knew this until I stepped into this world, you know. So the amount of research that is done to fill a product pipeline, using different types of techniques, right? Different types of research. So quantitative, that's a lot of surveys trying to get to numbers and statistical values and things like that. And there's also qualitative research, which is really kind of stepping into the consumer's world, talking with consumers and seeing how some of these concepts sit with them, see what's important to them. And so these companies are doing both, and they're spending lots and lots of money. And a lot of times, by the time you kind of come up with an idea, you know, and get it all the way to a shelf, that's sometimes an 18 to 24 month process. So there's a lot of time and effort and resources being put into that. Now it's changing, right? Because digital, different types of techniques are getting us information faster. But what's important is to realize that the purpose of the research is to uncover consumer needs. So what is the unmet need? What do consumers want? What do they even not know that they want? Trying to understand that consumer behavior is what paves the way for that new product innovation.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Amira, trauma. My question is, how is trauma stored in our relationships with food?
Yeah, so like Dr. Nake touched on, sometimes the foods that we eat can express themselves as certain diseases and manifest in the body. Sorry. So the foods that we eat are either one of two things. They're either good for you, so they promote health in your body and lead you on a path toward healing, or they're not good for you and they promote illness in your body, which leads you on the path of trauma or not being able to address your trauma. So the food that we eat, that we put in our body, is directly related to our ability to deal with the trauma that we experience as human beings on this earth. One of the ways that I was able to kind of unpack my relationship with food and the trauma that I had to heal from was by doing an extended juice cleanse. I was able to kind of remove my solid food patterns from the equation completely and go into a sacred space where I was still getting the nutrition that I needed during the juice cleanse, and able to start physically healing and mentally healing and emotionally healing. And it allows you to kind of identify those patterns that you have with food and see what's been healthy for me and what's not, and what's getting in the way of my healing and what isn't.
Thank you for that. Now I'm going to follow up with the spirituality question, which I'm really a major proponent of, the holistic mind, body, and soul healing. Why is that important for finding purpose and contributing to the greater good?
Yeah, so it comes back to this idea of like, you have to put on your oxygen mask in order to put on someone else's. In order for you to be an agent of good for the collective, you have to start to heal yourself. So in order for you to heal other people, you have to take that journey of healing yourself. And healing yourself is really hard. A lot of people think we only have to, like, a lot of people get into plant-based eating just because they want to physically look good. But we know that we're not just physical beings on a physical planet, that our existence is way more complex than that. We are spiritual beings, we're mental beings, we're emotional beings. Plant-based eating allows you to take care of that physical foundation first, which is the foundation that you need in order to heal all the other bodies that we have, spiritual, mental, emotional. Once you're able to start your healing journey, you can then go out into the world. It's like a domino effect. You just start to bring people into this healing light. So it's really important that, you know, you have a sense of where you are in the world, and then you can go out and help other people. And it has to work that way. I've never seen someone who didn't start healing themselves effectively help others heal. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, exactly. That's the foundation. I always promote the foundation of happiness. If you're not happy internally, you're not going to be happy, make anybody else happy. So thank you for that.
So just go somewhere and heal.
That's perfect. Amira, you're talking about the connection between happiness, health, hope, and healing. And that's really, the work that you're doing. And Dr. Naik, you are a doctor, you're a physician, and you have the privilege, of serving the communities, and especially our Black and Brown communities. You've spoken about environmental racism that we experience day in and day out. As you were talking earlier, I almost, have this visual of looking at these rough neighborhoods, these zip codes, and almost like a cloud of bad air
pollution,
like water pollution, like everything's just surrounding them and determining outcomes. Now, that is the reality, right? And it is what it is. You practice lifestyle medicine. Tell us a little bit about how lifestyle medicine goes beyond just the pillar of plant-based nutrition, that there's more to it, and talk to us about that.
Thank you. So yes, you're absolutely right. We know that pollution inequity is a very real thing. To your point, Black and Brown communities are exposed to between 50 to 70% more pollution than they cause, and pollution is directly linked to cardiovascular death, cancer death, and respiratory disease death. So we know this is a problem. Lifestyle medicine, though, is in some ways a very revolutionary act, and it's a lot of what Amira is speaking about. So it's not just plant-based nutrition, it's making sure that you have an opportunity to practice self-care in the form of meditation or mindfulness or whatever form of stress relief you can find. We know that chronic stress is an independent risk factor for heart disease, cancer, death. So it's very important when we talk about things like risk factors in the Black and Brown communities for heart disease and cancer and stroke, and we know that all of these rates are higher in these communities. It's not just about what they're putting into their mouths, it's what they're exposed to on a daily basis externally, the external racism, the external stressors. So working through mindfulness and stress relief, making sure that we can form good social connections, these have all been shown in multiple branches of literature, of scientific literature, to really help to heal the body. So that's a really important aspect. Another aspect is avoidance of risky behaviors. So, practicing safe sex, avoiding illicit drugs. I'm a lung doctor, so I'm also going to say avoid smoking pot. I don't really care how else you ingest it, but smoking it into your lungs is a setup for damage to your lungs. But another aspect is exercise. So when you talk about Black and Brown communities, they tend to be working more because they're economically disadvantaged. So how do you find time in your day to work out or to do all the things you need to do when it's all you can do to get to work, go to your next job, take care of your kids, put food on the table? And again, we know because of generations of systemic racism that these problems mostly affect Black and Brown communities. That's not to say that poor white people don't experience these things, but there hasn't been a systemic governmental response that deliberately created a system to oppress poor white communities as they have poor Black and Brown communities.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that. Susan, my question for you is, why should plant entrepreneurs invest in formal research, especially after hearing everything that we're hearing today on this panel?
Yeah, I was listening to the previous panelists and just thinking about that, and the plant-based industry is on fire. So Alicia said that it is on fire. 5-10 years ago, it was fringe, it was niche. You always seem to be chasing the buzzwords, but I really think that plant-based is here to stay when you start to look at the trends of conscious eating, conscious living. Unfortunately, a lot of the research, most of the research is done with people of privilege, with people who have money. And so when you start to look at the economically disadvantaged, you can say, well, the barriers are money, the barriers are time, but it's really important to do the research to say, but what are the motivators to that? So what are those ingrained beliefs that Mallory was talking about? How do you get to understand who your consumer is, what the needs are, so that if you're creating something new, it's resonating with them, that it's relevant to them, that you're speaking a language that makes sense. And so that research not only helps you find the right consumer, the right audience, it carries all the way through what you're creating, the messaging and everything that you're doing that. And that's heavily values based. So that research and really getting to talk with your audience is incredibly important to understand what that is, because we hear a lot of the same. And again, it's for mostly white targets with money. So how do you extend that out? Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm going to hand it over to Nivi in a minute. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We have been getting comments, so I just want to share that we are listening to a panel on connecting the dots for intersectional veganism, and some of the comments that have come in are thanking us for sharing this information. Again, we appreciate you. Tofu has never caused a pandemic, which is true. Miriam says, we can't fix one problem if we don't care about other pressing problems. All problems in this world that hurts, harm, oppress, kill, and such affects all of us. And we can see this as we go through this pandemic. And thank you again, Miriam, for tuning in. I want to thank our sponsors, A Welfare World, Veg Fund, Women Funders in Animal Rights, Eat the Change, Mercy for Animals, NutritionFacts.org, Jane Unchained News for allowing us this platform to have this discussion. Thank you again, everyone. We appreciate it. We are pressed for time right now, so I'm going to let Nivi close it out. Do you have any closing remarks?
Well, thank you so much, Naijha, and thank you so much, our dear, dear panelists, Amira, Dr. Naik, Susan, and also big thanks to ALICIA ROBB, Mallory COMBEMALE, and LAILA KASSAM, who joined us before. You know, the big thing that I always think about is when women get together and they choose to really have a voice, irrespective of the ethnic group we belong, the country or the creed or the culture we belong, we make things happen. We move the world. And that's also because, and it's, you know, not represented in leadership theories, you know, in the corporate world and so on. It tends to be male dominated, but hey, women lead differently. We collaborate and cooperate differently. And when we do collaborate and, you know, come together, things change and we can move the world. We have a vice president, you know, we're making a start, the big historic milestone in this country. So we have our first woman vice president of the United States. She's of mixed ancestral origin. And actually, when you look at the ethnicities in presence here on this panel, you know, she's representing all of us, and she's indeed representing Americans of all color, you know. And so you know, the big thing that I have to say is thank you so much for the work that you do. To our viewers, thank you for viewing and watching and listening in. And we're running a petition, which is #PlantPoweredKamala. Sign the petition, take the time to read our open letter. Our open letter has been created with the help of plant-based nutrition movement, nutritionists and nurses over there, as well as by the Center of Contemporary Sciences, led by Dr. Aisha Akhtar, who's a master's in public health. And so it's a robust document. Go through it. Check out why the conversation on intersectional veganism is really important, not just for us, not just for animals and our health, but for our economy and for our country, and indeed the rest of the world. Thank you so much for joining and signing off. And I thank my co-host Naijha at Naijha Speaks, and a big thank you to Jane Bellis-Mitchell at Jane Unchained News. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Nivi, for putting this together. Again, thank you for tuning in, and let's all stay connected. We have lots of work to do. Have a good one.
Peace. Bye. Thank you.